Good morning, students. Myself, Major Komal Katyal, Department of Zoology, GK Gwani Government College, Bhinmal. Today, we will discuss about the blood circulatory system. And in the first part of this lecture, we will discuss about the blood pressure. आज हम बात करेंगे रुधिर दाब या रक्त दाब के बारे में. Now, what is BP or what is a blood pressure? Blood pressure is the pressure exerted by the flowing blood on the walls of artery. The normal blood pressure varies by age, but it is approximately 120 mm mercury, that is a systolic, over 80 mm mercury diastolic in a healthy young adult. In females, the pressure are often 8 to 10 mm mercury less. People who are in good physical condition or who have a favorable genetic predisposition have lower blood pressures. It is often best to refer to the blood pressure as a single number called the mean arterial pressure or MAP. The MAP is roughly 1/3 of the way between the diastolic and the systolic blood pressure. It is defined as 1/3 systolic BP minus diastolic BP plus diastolic BP. Say for example, in a person with a BP of 120/80 mm mercury, the MAP 1/3 will be 120 minus 80 plus 80 equal to 93.3 mm mercury. In the smaller arterioles, capillaries and veins, the BP pulsations are not detectable and only a mean BP is measurable. You can see here in this figure the purple color and the blue areas of the figure are showing the systolic and the diastolic blood pressure. Beginning from the left in the graphical chart, you can see aorta, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, which are shown in purple, then venules, veins and vena cava. जो रक्त दाब है, रक्त दाब को हमने यहाँ पर एक ग्राफ द्वारा दर्शाया गया है, जिसमें जो हल्का बैंगनी कलर है वो केशिकाओं या कैपिलरीज का है, जहां पर रक्त दाब बहुत कम होता है, और जो शिराएं हैं या महाशिरा है उनके अंदर रक्त दाब काफी कम होता है, जो यहाँ हल्के नीले रंग से हमने ग्राफ में दर्शाया हुआ है. The blood pressure measurements is taken by the health professionals on pressure in the larger artery. Now the two terms we are using here is the systolic and diastolic. Systolic means the pressure at the peak of the ventricular contraction, and diastolic means pressure when the ventricle relax. The systolic pressure is written first and the diastolic pressure is last, as you can see here, 120/80 mm mercury. Pressure in the blood vessel decreases as distance from the heart increases. The pulse is the heart rate, and the pressure wave of the blood is monitored at pressure point in arteries where pulse is easily palpated. So, during a cardiac cycle, the systolic and diastolic, systole का मतलब होता है संकुचन से और डायस्टोल का मतलब होता है शीतलन से. तो संकुचन और शीतलन के दौरान जो रुधिर वाहिनियों के अंदर बहता हुआ रक्त उनकी भित्तियों पर एक दाब उत्पन्न कर रहा है. जब संकुचन के समय जो दाब उत्पन्न होगा वो संकुचन दाब, और जो शीतलन के समय रक्त दाब उत्पन्न होगा उसको शीतलन रक्त दाब या डायस्टोलिक ब्लड प्रेशर कहा जाता है. The pulse generally averages from 70 to 76 beats per minute at rest. Now, how we can measure the arterial blood pressure of a human being? Let's see through the diagram. Say for example, the blood pressure is systolic 120 and diastolic 70 mm mercury is to be measured. It is generally measured from the brachial artery of the forearm. The course of the brachial artery of the arm. Assume a blood pressure of 120/70 in a young healthy person. In the next diagram you can see we are applying a rubber cuff initially with a inflated with air. The pressure in the cuff is above 120 and no sounds are audible. At this point, the blood pressure cuff is wrapped snugly around the arm just above the elbow and inflated until the cuff pressure exceeds the systolic blood pressure. At this point, the blood flow into the arm is stopped and the brachial pulse cannot be felt or heard. कहने का मतलब यह है कि हमारी जो भुजा है, भुजा का वो भाग जहां पर ब्रैकियल धमनी होती है वहां पर एक हम रबड़ का कफ लपेटते हैं और उसमें प्रेशर देते हैं एयर का, और ये प्रेशर जब तक सिस्टोलिक ब्लड प्रेशर से एक्सीड नहीं हो जाता तब तक हम ब्लड प्रेशर देते रहते हैं. Now next you can see the pressure in the cuff gradually reduced. The examiner listens or auscultates for the sounds in the brachial artery with a stethoscope. The pressure read as the first soft tapping sound are heard, the first point at which a small amount of blood is spurting through the constricted artery and is recorded as the systolic pressure. कहने का मतलब यह है कि रबर का कफ भुजा के चारों ओर और उसके पश्चात जब हम दाब उत्पन्न करते हैं जो सिस्टोलिक ब्लड प्रेशर से अधिक हो जाता है, अल्टीमेटली क्या होता है, ब्रैकियल आर्टरी के अंदर ब्लड सप्लाई बंद हो जाती है और धीरे धीरे हम क्या करते हैं, उस दाब को कम करते जाते हैं. जैसे जैसे हम दाब को कम करते जाएंगे वैसे वैसे उसमें धीरे धीरे क्या होगा, ब्लड फ्लो करना प्रारंभ हो जाता है. इसके साथ ही जो एग्जामिन कर रहा है वो स्टेथोस्कोप की सहायता से जो हृदय की धमनियां हैं उनका सुनने का प्रयास करता है. Now next, as the pressure is reduced still further, the sound becomes louder and more distinct. When the artery is no longer constricted and blood flows freely, the sound can no longer be heard. The pressure at which the sound disappears is recorded as the diastolic pressure. और अधिक दाब को कम करने के पश्चात जो हृदय धमनी है वो नहीं सुनाई देती और जो धमनियां हैं, धमनियां अब बिल्कुल भी कॉन्स्ट्रिक्टेड नहीं होती है और उनके अंदर जो रुधिर है वो बिल्कुल बिना किसी अवरोध के तेजी से बहता रहता है. इस समय जो धमनी हमें से धमनियों में और हृदय में जो हमें पल्प रेट है, जो साउंड है, जो ध्वनि है वो सुनाई नहीं देती है, उसको हम रिकॉर्ड करते हैं शीतलन रक्तदाब या डायस्टोलिक ब्लड प्रेशर के रूप. सो इन दिस वे स्फिग्नोमैनोमीटर रक्तदाब मापी जिसको बोला जाता है, उसकी सहायता और स्टेथोस्कोप की सहायता से हम क्या करते हैं, मानव शरीर के अंदर रक्तदाब की गणना करते हैं, उसको ज्ञात करते हैं. This is how we can determine or measure the arterial blood pressure in a human being. Now, what are the normal values of systolic and the diastolic blood pressure? If it is below 120 and below 80, it's said to be normal. If it is from 120 to 129, the systolic, and below 80, the diastolic, it is elevated. The high BP, that is the stage 1, if it exceeds from 130 to 139, and systolic, the diastolic from 80 to 89. High blood pressure stage 2 if it exceeds 140 or higher, and diastolic 90 or higher, and the hypersensitive or hypertensive crisis if it is above 180 the systolic and above 120 the diastolic. You have to consult your doctor immediately. Now this is what we have just studied in the previous slide. The blood pressure category from normal, elevated, high BP stage 1, high BP stage 2 and hypertensive crisis, what I have told you earlier on. Now how we can know what is our normal blood pressure by age? The normal blood pressure by age is shown in this blood pressure chart, which is according to age. In the leftmost column, the years is mentioned from 1 to 12 months, the first, and the last is 60 to 64 years. And you can see the blood pressure is shown with minimal, normal, and maximum, where you can see if it exceeds above the maximum level in all these age categories. Say for example, for a young person of 20 to 24 years, it is normal from 120 to 79. But if it exceeds from 130 to 83, it is said to be maximum, and above this you can call it as the hypertensive condition. Now how we can manage the blood pressure? Here is a chart which is showing that how we can measure our blood pressure or how we can manage the blood pressure. So we were discussing about how to manage blood pressure. हम बात कर रहे थे कि किस तरह से हम अपने रक्त दाब को नियंत्रित रख सकते हैं. Now first you should know how we can understand the reading. Say for example, it is mentioned in the number 1 systolic 117 and diastolic 76, and if your systolic is higher than the top number, that is higher than 117 as per the chart I have shown in the previous slide, you should track the levels. Now how to track the level? It is shown in the chart, and I have already explained in the previous 2 slides that what is the normal blood pressure, what is elevated blood pressure, what is high blood pressure stage 1, that is the hypertension, and then the hypertension stage 2, that is above 140, and the hypertensive crisis, that is above 180. Now at this juncture you have to track your levels with 3 C's: check, change and control. It means you have to check your blood pressure. You have to change. It means you have to control your various behavior activities, the physiological activities or daily routines. Now what are the tips for the success? Now the first one, you should eat smart. It means eating the healthy diet of vegetable foods, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts and so on, and avoid the highly processed foods. Then move more. It means you have to maintain a good physical activity. Then manage your weight. If you are overweight, you have to reduce your weight. It will ultimately reduce your BP or the blood pressure. Now try to avoid smoking. You should not smoke because nicotine and tobacco are dangerous and they can increase your blood pressure. And in the last, you should sleep well. All these are the tips for success and to maintain your blood pressure. Now this finishes my lecture on BP or blood pressure. Thank you.